Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagen. We are back here in Studio 130 for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of the Gold Standard and Iowa Conservative Podcast. John Hendrickson and myself here today. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's nice to not be blown away by the wind today.
I know. It is nice. We need to quit talking about taxes and get out of here and go outside.
Yeah.
Let the weekend begin. Good. What?
In pre-production, you guys were talking about all these spring sports.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention, and I didn't get a chance to bring it up, but I need you to teach me how to play chess, because I always envy those old guys that sit outside and play chess and smoke cigars, and I want to be one of them.
You should. They used to. When I was in law school at Iowa, in Iowa City, there was always games going. Chess games, guys playing chess outside on the
that's neat
downtown, and I always thought that's pretty cool. I never stopped and played. Maybe I did once. I have from time to. I'm not very good.
Yeah.
So now I tried to get you to play me on the Civil War chess set that you've got.
I know. I need to get that back out.
And can't get that going.
Yeah.
We'll have to get that going.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm a good one to teach on that or not, but that's good. Before we go any further, John, I want to try and put this plug in at the front end, because I haven't been lately, is to make sure if you are one of our audio-only listeners, that we are on YouTube, we are on Rumble, and we'd love to have you get on there and make sure you subscribe. The more people subscribe, the more the YouTube algorithm is going to put us into other people's feed, and we can get the message out to more people. So definitely check us out there and give us a like and subscribe. And if you're on one of our video platforms, you'll be able to see that John has yet again forgot to bring President Hoover to join us for the podcast today. So
I've really been absent-minded.
Well, yes, you have been.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Pre-production meeting this morning was a little abbreviated, but we wanted to sort of give an update of where things stand in the legislative session, but not so much just a running down of all the different bills, because I think it's sort of boiled down to three issues that at least Iowans for Tax Relief has really focused on this year. So I know, John, we've touched on these in sort of a here or there throughout the legislative session, but I think to set things off, what's still alive that we've got some tax bills, some amendments. What are you really looking forward to seeing what comes out of the rest of the legislative session?
One bill I really want to see move forward, and I don't think it has yet, is the second phase of the state government reorganization, and that is mainly the bill that was focusing on the recommendations that had come out over the summer and in the final report in the fall, the boards and commissions committee and I think the House has changed it somewhat and scaled it back, with the Senate kind of passed the governor's bill, and I'm not sure if those have been reconciled yet, but I'm hoping that something will come out, because I think that's an important part of the process, so that's one thing I'm hoping. I'm hoping I don't think it has passed yet, but the overall governor's regulatory reform bill.
Nope, that's still a live round.
Yeah, I think I would like to see that one still. And obviously the taxpayer protection amendments. And then we're still hoping that a good income tax bill will come out.
I think to that end, John, you mentioned there's still going to be a tax bill, and we'll get into that in a little bit more depth. The constitutional amendments, and then still hoping that the Senate will pass the ban on universal basic income at the local level.
Yes, I forgot about that.
That should be a slam dunk. I should be an easy one to pass. At least smacking around socialism in Polk County should be a pretty easy lift for this legislature. Okay, so I guess to begin with a little bit on the tax bill. So, John, we've talked about the governor had a proposal on taxes, and there was a joint bill or proposal from the two Ways and Means Committee chairs, Chairman Dawson and Chairman Kaufman, and we talked about that at our tax day luncheon. It's my understanding they're still talking, but whatever we get in the end probably isn't going to be exactly either one of those. The idea of an ultimate elimination, I think, is still a little bit on the table, but we'll see if that survives, because I think there's an argument, even if you're strongly in favor of elimination, is that, well, do we want to pass something that takes 100 years to phase out, or if that's the best we can do, maybe we just wait and try again and get something a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
And then what sort of acceleration would be in place and what we can get down to there. And I think that's still remind me again, John, just how much money is sitting there on the sidelines available, whether it be through the surplus dollars or the taxpayer relief fund. Where are we at?
The surplus last year was a little bit over $1 billion. And basically the taxpayer relief fund is $3.7 billion, approaching $4 billion. And the reserve accounts, which don't factor in, but right. I think it's important for folks to know that those are filled at their limit. And so the Iowa is doing very well. In fact, the governor sent out a press release this week that Moody's and Finch had basically reinstated Iowa's AAA credit rating, right, which is a good sign. And one of the things they had said, both credit agencies had said that one of the reasons for this was just Iowa's financial condition is just in such a strong shape.
Right. Yeah. I think a number that we have mentioned but don't talk about a lot is, and it goes right along with that ongoing surplus amount, is that the state of Iowa is spending less than 90% of ongoing revenue on the budget.
Yes, yeah.
There's a structural surplus.
Mm-hmm.
Year over year, the state of Iowa collects far more than they need to operate state government.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two reasons for tax cuts, right? One, which we believe and advocate for, is that it's the right thing to do. Let Iowans keep more of their money. They're going to do better with it and get more value out of it. And government shouldn't just consume as much as possible. But the other, and I think more kind of basic thing here, is if the state doesn't need these dollars, then why are they taxing them?
Yes, absolutely.
And you almost don't have a duty to only tax what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand that we have some anticipated future revenue reductions from the tax bill that we already did. And so if you look forward next year, like that income tax number is going to come down because we plan on it coming down. I'm sure our friends on the left and many in the media are going to write the articles that, oh no, the sky is falling,
yes,
when we knew all along, because we did it by design, that number would come down. But we're only talking about right sizing the budget, right?
That's absolutely right.
And so the doom and gloom is that, like, oh, you're just going to rob money from public education or health and human services by continuing to pursue tax cuts. No, we're talking about just bringing those two things together in alignment.
Yes, yeah.
Which is where you could kind of come in if you wanted to with your snarky comment this morning.
Yeah, well, there was because it really upset me. There was an article I saw, and I forget what paper it was, but the title of it was "Republicans Place Tax Cuts Before Education." And so, in other words, tax cuts are coming before at the expense of public education, and which is completely nonsense.
No, never mind that the legislature just got done passing $275 million in new K-12 education funding. But we'll just set that aside for a minute.
Yeah, and so every year the education budget goes up, just not as fast as what some would like it to be. And the other thing is that I would actually say the other way, it's education that's holding up the tax cuts.
Amen.
In fact, it's and this may be controversial, but one of the reasons why we're not really having much movement on the tax bill is that education funding is tying up everything.
Right.
And it's the only part of the budget that is automatically increasing every single year.
It is significantly more than half of the state budget.
Yes.
Every year, and growing.
Yes.
If you think about the state budget as a pie, the portion of that pie that's going to education grows every year.
Yeah.
And look, many Iowans value education and think that it should be top of mind when we dole out but there's always a limit to it, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
yeah, and well, there isn't, I guess, if you're, you know.
And a lot of teachers I've talked to in Iowa, they don't say their biggest problem is a lack of resources. Their biggest problem is that there's no discipline in the schools.
Right. There's many reasons why education isn't where I think. Look, even a lot of conservatives wish it was. You know, we're not anti-education.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, many of us are very pro-education done the right way.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I enjoyed that comment that it is education getting in the way of a better fiscal path forward for the state of Iowa.
And the other thing is that there's really no evidence that says if you just keep dumping tons of money into education that you're going to have better outcomes. And if that's one lesson we should even learn from the whole atrocity of the federal Department of Education, which has actually made things worse.
Yeah. Well, and I think coming back to where things are at with the budget. Okay, we've got a giant $1 billion structural surplus, which will come down a little bit, or maybe even a fair amount. And we've got $3.7 billion, maybe $4 billion in the taxpayer relief fund. Is that those numbers, even if you plan for future budget growth, even if you anticipate the future reductions in income tax revenue, is that we are still collecting more than we need to operate. And it is the responsible thing to do to continue to try and align those, the tax amount and the spending amount. And so not only is the right thing to do for taxpayers, but I fear that if we don't get that, it's just that ongoing, there's always going to be pressure to spend more money in government.
Yes, absolutely.
It is the constant. It doesn't matter in good times and bad times, where the economy's at, who's in charge of government, who your governor is, there is always pressure to grow government.
Yes.
And the longer you let those dollars sit there unencumbered, the more pressure there's going to be to spend it and grow government. So it's important that we make these steps now to continue to accelerate the cuts that we had before and to bring the rate down to an amount that's responsible. We have been very consistent, John, that we are not, at least right now, cutting into the starve the beast mentality. We're going to cut below what the state needs and then figure it out later. That's the lesson of other states.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right.
The Iowa experiment is cut as much as we can and understand that the legislature still controls the budget and can hold the line on spending. But holding the line on spending is a whole lot easier to do if you know that you're not going to have windfalls in future revenue.
Yes, yeah.
So
yeah,
I think that's important. And I maybe I've gone on too far, but I really wanted to get to this Tax Foundation article by our friend Jared Walzak that the title is, it just came out, Can States Afford Their Recent Tax Cuts? And explores, several states have cut taxes like Iowa. And can they afford these long term? The folks on the left would say that Iowa is on the road to financial ruin. Kansas, never going to cut education over here, that everything's just going to fall apart at the seams. Well, that's not it. Well, first of all, those arguments don't hold water. But secondly, Jared looks at this from a 50-state standpoint to ask the question of whether this is sustainable or not. You probably spent more time with the article than I did, but
yeah, and it's actually very interesting. And I'll just read one quote from Jared here, the 27 states that cut the rate of a major tax, so that means individual income, corporate income, or sales tax, experienced a 9.8% tax revenue increase in real terms between calendar years 2019 and 2023, while states that didn't cut any of these taxes, or in a few cases increased them, saw revenues grow by 6.2%. And so the tax-cutting states grew revenue faster with lower rates. And then, there's always those on the left that say, well, these tax cuts have gutted the budget. And what Jared basically found is that, and I'm quoting from the article, states that have not cut rates of a major tax since 2021 have grown their budgets by 24% in real terms. And so, we've seen that. Places like Minnesota, California have record increases in spending. Quoting again, well, states that have cut taxes have grown their budgets by 15.1%. So what's happening here is that states that are cutting taxes, they're not slashing their budgets. It's that the tax cuts are coming out of the portion of revenue growth, which is something that you've brought up a lot of times, talking about what's going on here in Iowa. And government spending, it continues to increase, and so it's just sort of a gradual increase, which we've seen in Iowa, and so and that's one thing we've talked about before, and how the last few years Iowa has kept their budget within the growth of population plus inflation. That's one thing I made a comment during the last podcast. What I appreciate about what Leader Whitver was doing on the Senate side was keeping spending within that limit. And so what Jared is saying here is that, one, the states that have not cut income tax rates are actually growing their budgets at a faster pace, whereas states that are cutting taxes, they're still increasing spending, but just not as a fast pace. And that's, of course, important, because you cannot, in a sense, cut taxes and increase spending. I mean, it just, especially when you have to balance your budget.
Right.
Because, that's what gets Uncle Sam in trouble.
Well, that's always the big difference, is states have to balance the budget, or at least the bill will come due, where the federal government can just print money. Jared makes the point here that it says, that is, we shouldn't take this too far, naively asserting that tax cuts paid for themselves. I think it's important. That's not the argument that we're making.
No.
Is that if you cut taxes by, $1 billion, you'll get it back in growth, but you will get more growth.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the important thing that's made here, is that, okay, I just went on a small rant about not taxing any more than you need, but it's not just to let the folks have their dollars back. You're going to grow the state economy by more.
That's right.
By reducing the amount that government collects, because those dollars in the private sector are spent and they multiply at a higher factor than when government spends them. Because government is by nature inefficient in the use of those dollars. And it goes back to the classic idea of stimulus spending. Well, I suppose if you want to borrow a bunch of money and you can do that and you can juice the economy, but it's not going to be done as efficiently as those dollars in the hands of private citizens and private businesses. So but isn't that really philosophically, it's a whole idea of tax cuts. It's just the right thing to do, both economically and it's a right thing to do to let folks keep their money.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And it's important because it's, people forget that when you have a lower tax rate, it's businesses that can do more with that. They can hire more people. They can give higher wages, which benefits individuals who are working. And so it just leads to a much better economy, better society. And Jared points out in this article, he says, and I quote, "If anything, states that have prioritized greater economic competitiveness through tax reform and relief may find themselves in a better position to weather an economic downturn." And so, and he's absolutely right, because, we're seeing a lot of pressure starting to come in states that are doing the direct opposite of Iowa, where California and Minnesota, and a lot of these states have been in fiscal basket cases for years now, but like Minnesota is going to be facing some very major budget difficulties because they just decide to turn on the spending spigot and they can't seem to control themselves.
I would imagine they probably won't say it out loud, although every once in a while somebody sort of lets it slip. In the back of their mind, well, we can always raise taxes.
Yeah.
That if we want to continue spending, or if maybe we win a little, we'll just raise taxes. And they may think in this progressive ideology they have that if we spend a bunch of money on government, that it'll somehow grow our economy. I think some of them believe that, but it's not grounded in reality or any amount of history either. So
their view is that the way to grow your economy is basically through the government spending money on education, healthcare, and all these things, and that just doesn't work. And if it did work, we would see, socialist countries doing a lot better economically. They just aren't.
No, it's it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And history would.
And even on a federal level, even the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, let it slip a few weeks ago, admitting how much the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act worked.
Yeah.
In terms of giving tax relief to people, and so it. And we've seen numerous examples in Iowa where a lot of businesses expanded as a result of that.
Well, and that's another thing that's touched on in the article that I would like to maybe work on as we look at it moving forward. I mean, right now we're trying to get through the legislative session, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is set to expire in 25, right?
Yes, yeah.
Or at least major provisions of it. And, what impact will that have just on taxpayers? What impact will that have on state revenue collections and working through all of that? So, but that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
I do want to spend a little time, John, thinking and talking a little bit more about the constitutional amendments, because I know that you've been writing and spending some time on that. So just to recap, there are two proposed amendments to the state constitution. One is a requirement that any future tax increase would require a 2/3 supermajority vote of the legislature, and the other one would be to require a flat tax in the state of Iowa. And as a reminder, it's very difficult to amend the Constitution of the state of Iowa. We do not have ballot initiatives, ballot referendum in Iowa, so the only way that what happens is two consecutive general assemblies, and General Assembly being a 2-year in between elections, two consecutive general assemblies have to pass a resolution. The governor has no role in that. And then it goes on the ballot where it would have to pass by a simple majority on the ballot. So I just wanted to set the stage that we're talking about amendments that would then have to be enacted again by the following General Assembly after this next election, and then presumably be on the ballot in the fall of 2026. Did I say that all right, John?
Yes. Yep,
okay.
yep.
I'm going to let you. The reason why now, that's on you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they, I'm not sure if listeners, if we've talked about this, but the only thing that's really changed in this process is they when it was first introduced, they were together as one. And now they've both been separated out as separate amendments. And so, as you said, the first one would be a 2/3 supermajority requirement, which is not anything controversial new. There's about 17 states that have this provision, either in law or in their constitution. The other one would constitutionally protect the flat tax, so we would could have a single flat income tax rate. I mean, we could not have what we have now would be the progressive tax. So both those would be significant constitutional protections. Both are important. The 2/3 one is especially important because it would force the legislature to come to a consensus on raising taxes, and it should be hard for them to raise taxes. For example, California, which is not a bastion of conservatism, has a supermajority requirement. And the only reason that I don't think there's a lot of attention to that is that the Democrats there do have a supermajority, so they can, do whatever they want.
Right.
But it forces. One benefit to this is that it forces the legislature, if there is a situation where they must or they think they need to raise taxes, to build a consensus in order to do that. And I think that's something that there should be no problem in that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that there's other things in the Constitution that are in a sense dedicated or protected, and the taxpayer should also have those protections.
I think about we did polling on this, John.
Yes.
That these are popular ideas. The 2/3 especially, look at 68% of Iowans in the recent ITR Foundation poll supported the idea that it takes a 2/3 majority to raise taxes. I think that's a strong number.
That is,
That it really just gives you almost a look at just how much Iowans do not want their taxes raised. So that's good. And the other one, there was a plurality that supported the flat tax amendment as well. I personally believe that that's just a little harder to explain and harder for folks to like, well, wait a minute, what does that really do?
Yeah.
And if they don't understand something, they just say undecided. But it's still a strong plurality, and I'm confident that they would both pass on the ballot. Because I think that's also the important point. Ultimately, you're giving Iowans the right to vote on whether they want this in the Constitution or not.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I feel strongly they'd pass. Now, I saw somewhere one of the criticisms was, well, we had a similar provision that was proposed and on the ballot in 1999.
Yes. Yeah.
And that failed. And there's some real differences between that in 1999 and today. And the one is someone that's sort of a student of politics and elections, is they held that election in, I think, June. And so it was held in the summer. It wasn't on the general election. And so it's naturally on very low turnout. And in low turnout elections, you never know quite what happens. And there was a lot of folks that lined up on the other side, the folks that want to spend more in tax money, predominantly on the left, that lined up to mobilize their folks and to work against it. But in recent history, our constitutional amendments have been on the ballot in the fall on the general election when everyone shows up to vote. And so I feel just that alone, I feel a lot better about this one passing. Another thing to factor is in 1999, Iowa had just elected a Democrat governor the year before. And that was a different time when Iowa was a purple state and maybe even moving towards becoming a little bit blue, because it was 7 years later, they elect a Democrat trifecta in the state with, we're in a different Iowa now politically than we were then. Iowa is a red state today. Thinking about polling, we believe, either you look at the Des Moines Register's poll, the ITR Foundation poll, we're in a plus 15, plus 17 kind of environment here for Republicans.
Yeah.
Now, not to necessarily equate Republican with tax cut, but I think you can use that as somewhat of a proxy for conservative policy versus more progressive policy. So I all signs point to this passing by wide margins.
I think those are good points. And, to go back to that argument where, people are saying, well, 2/3 is anti-democratic. But one, like you said, the people of Iowa will have a chance to vote on this.
Right.
And then the other thing is if you look at the last several elections, overwhelmingly, I think the majority of Iowans support what this governor and the legislature have done.
That's a great point, John.
On taxes. I mean, to say that this is something that's anti-democratic, I think that argument doesn't hold water.
Yeah. Well, I think back to 2018, which was the first time that Governor Reynolds was on the ballot running for, she had succeeded Governor Branstad, but then was on the ballot for that first re-election or election or however you want to think about that. And that was a really tough year for Republicans, that midterm. And yet she won against Fred Hubble. And the one positive piece that she was able to put out that really resonated with Iowans was she had cut taxes.
Yes.
That 2018 tax bill, which was significant, maybe not quite as significant as what we've ultimately ended up doing, but that was the one that set the stage.
Yeah.
And that piece, that actually helped catapult her to victory in 2018. There were other factors. I don't want to say it's just because she cut taxes, but it absolutely was a factor.
It was a huge, yep, you're absolutely
And
right.
so, we have recent history where cutting taxes or simply honoring the taxpayer is very popular at the ballot box. And so that's great. I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's a really important point to make as well. So these, they're actually resolutions. They're not, that are in front of the legislature. They're bouncing between House and Senate. They started with it all together as one resolution with the two ideas in it. They've broken that apart, and so those pieces are crossing. They're both eligible. I'm still optimistic that both will move, but we're gonna be following. That's one of the pieces that Iowans for Tax Relief at the Capitol is still strongly advocating for, and I believe we'll see some wins on those.
Yeah, I think they're very important, and some of the strongest legislation to come out this session.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good. So, all right, John, we made it to 30 minutes without really knowing exactly where we were going at the front end. So congratulations out of that. Anything else we need to talk about today?
Well, I want to put in a plug for listeners to tune in to Iowa Public Radio on Monday because you'll be on there talking about tax policy on River to River. And I apologize, I don't know what time that is. But
I believe it's over the noon hour.
Yeah, so if you're...
I'm going to do my best Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
While I'm on there.
Yeah.
But no, it's probably a really tired joke. But no, it'll be interesting. We're going to just talk about tax policy on public radio, and it'll be fun.
Yeah.
I enjoy doing that stuff.
Yeah.
So good. All right. Well, thanks, John. Thank you, listeners. Again, don't forget to check us out on YouTube, Rumble, wherever you like to watch online. Well, I shouldn't say that, but definitely get on there and like and subscribe that. Thank you for joining us. And with all of that being said, we will see you next time on ITR Live.